Greetings and welcome back to Another Perspectives. I'm here with longtime subscriber Dafty97, and he is Scottish and had a keen interest in the events that went down with regards to Brexit and the United Kingdom and the membership of the United Kingdom in the European Union. And I think he has a lot to say about that. So, welcome here. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Now, I mean, to you, you expressed privately that you're happy about the exit vote.
Yeah, I'm glad we've left the European Union, but I wouldn't say I feel happy about it. I mean, I'm aware that it means different things to different people, and some people are going to lose out while others might benefit. So, and besides that, I don't really feel it's going to happen yet because there's still time for things to change around, I think. So,
I think it's interesting that it's a rare person who can recognize that even in favoring one side, you can acknowledge that there might be a downside for people who don't share your perspective, and I can see that. I can see, say, both sides of the coin. It doesn't really happen very often. Most people just, when it comes to politics and whatever, just try to shout you down and say, "Oh, I'm right about this," and don't want to listen to you.
yeah, well, I mean, if you look at farmers, I mean, they get huge subsidies from the EU. So, in the short term anyway, they are going to be one group of people that lose out. And besides that, I mean, for continental Europeans, I can understand what the EU means to them. I mean, it's history, it's about atonement to a certain degree as well, I think. So I
Hmm.
think there's sadness all over the place. But besides that, I'm quite happy with left because I think things are going to improve now in terms of immigration and taking back some laws that have been taken away from us. So
Yeah, a couple of things there. I mean, as you pointed out just now, this is kind of well, this is very much a long-term thing. I mean, I've said this before, for all the good it may do, Brexit was just a glorified opinion poll, and it has no legally binding power. I mean, sure, of course, politicians would be foolish to just ignore the results and say, "Oh, we're not going to do this." But already there seem to be doubts. I saw an interview with Nigel Farage about concerning some of his allies, like guys like Daniel Hannan and some of these others, Boris Johnson. It it occurred to him that their position might have gotten soft or weakened a bit. So I don't think you're out of the fire just yet.
no, I mean, David Cameron said there's going to be no second referendum, but for all we know, that means as long as he's in power, and when he's gone in 2 months and whoever replaces him comes in, there could well be. And if you kind of look at what's going on, they might have justification for it because the Leave vote won by just over 51%, I think.
Well,
And
but still, within a quote unquote working
yeah,
democracy, whatever that means, it's still a majority, right?
yeah, that's true. But you've also got Scotland, Northern Ireland, and even London sort of complaining about the result. So they've been signing petitions as well.
I get that, but I mean, it's never really a happy moment when you're on the receiving end of something that you didn't really want. I mean, I mean, it's a silly analogy, but if you have to choose ice cream and you want a chocolate, but everyone else picks vanilla, you're the unhappy camper. But majority and all that. I'm not saying that's a good thing necessarily, or I mean, most of my views on democracy and capital D democracy are, but it's just it's silly to push for another because we both know that if it had been reversed, that the stay had just barely cut the mustard and actually had managed to win by a very slim margin, uh, seems clear to me that they definitely would be saying, "Oh, just deal with it. You have to accept democracy." I understand both sides. Particularly, I mean, we're talking about Scotland right now. Last year, Scotland had a referendum on independence, and it narrowly voted to stay in the union. Uh, this struck me at the time, and still strikes me as something that mostly has just symbolic value than anything else. I don't think people retrospectively, it was hard to take too seriously. I don't You, as a Scotsman, probably have a different perspective.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, the no vote in the Scottish referendum won by 10%.
Hmm.
So I think, a lot of people here probably do value the union even more than they let on to themselves. I mean, I certainly do because, I mean, England and Scotland have accomplished a lot together. I mean, we've won two world wars together, we built an empire together.
Hmm.
And even if that history is good or bad, it's still history. I mean, it's taught in classrooms all over the world. We make movies about it, TV shows about it, we
Yeah.
write books about it. So it's had an impact. And I think, I especially would think it would be a shame to lose all that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's that aspect. I think maybe things have changed quite a bit. Over 20 years ago, when I visited Scotland for the first time, it seemed that maybe I'm wrong, there was more anti-English sentiment than there is now. Um, Although there's an interesting theory that, the only reason, I mean, who knows how true it is, the only reason that Scotland wants to stay in the EU is sort of to spite England, as it were. Because, for better or worse, Scotland was in some way colonized. I mean, the Highland clearances, all this unfortunate history. And it is history, and it happened. I'm not one to advocate, people resenting this for eons and eons, but and then there's of course the question of whether or not Scotland, most important question perhaps, is whether or not Scotland is economically viable enough to stand on its own feet without outside of the union. I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
Well, I think ultimately the answer is yes, but it depends on who's going to be running the country. And if it's going to be the SNP, I would definitely say no. I
Yeah,
mean, they've kind of built these economic plans based on the oil industry, which, it might have worked in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s, but it's just not viable anymore, I don't think.
yeah.
I mean, oil production has slowed down in recent years. I mean, they're actually bringing oil rigs back ashore right now because it's just so slow at the moment. So, yeah, I mean, the oil's not exactly running out, I have to say. I mean, that is a misconception that a lot of people have. I think about 70% of the oil reserves are still there, so there's plenty more to come. It's just that the reserves that are there are just deeper beneath the seabed, so they're difficult to get to. But
Yeah, but I mean, with enough work, I suppose also there's the English interest in the oil as well. I mean, if they were actually separate nations, then England couldn't people in England and politicians wouldn't be able to get access to some of the profits, and it wouldn't directly go into the English economy as well.
yeah, that's true. Right now, Scotland is the second highest contributor to the UK economy outside London.
Hmm.
And I think British politicians are all too aware of how valuable the oil is because they've done this thing. We call it gerrymandering. I don't know if you've heard of that.
So yeah, same term in the United States.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they've kind of gerrymandered the border between Scotland and England as it stretches out into the North Sea. So instead of going from latitude, it kind of cuts up diagonally. So what is Scottish waters have been taken by England right now. So if Scotland were to go independent, I don't know how England would get away with that. I think it would probably be taken to international courts and such, because to look at the map of what they've done, it's like a blatant attempt to take some of the oil. So,
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, but you seem, I mean, reluctant as you might be, to essentially be arguing for the validity. Well, it could, if Scotland went independent, then it would be possible to get along without the English.
well, yes, well, like I said, I mean, oil reserves are slow at the moment, but in the future they are going to pick up again. Scotland's quite rich in natural resources. I mean, it's renewable energy is going to be a big thing here as well, from wave energy, wind energy, hydroelectric, and such.
Mm.
But again, it's just the people who would be running the country, and the SNP, they're a left-wing political party. I mean, I've read it described in some newspaper reports that they're more like a student protest group than an actual party of power. And that to me is just the most apt description of them. I mean, they just don't really seem to live in reality. They just see the world as how they want it to be, then just make up these policies that they think are going to work, but everyone else keeps telling them it won't. So,
Yeah, I mean, but what is the alternative to the S&P? For those of people that know the S&P, they're a socialist leaning. Well, I guess you could say that they're socialist leaning Scottish National Party. I've seen some of the things they propose. It tends to be pretty off the wall. They don't really seem to be economically and politically savvy. They seem to
no.
be a sort of a combination of uh, idealism and just we'll just sort of figure it out as we go along.
Yeah, I think they want to adopt the Scandinavian model as a social democracy. So,
Ah, that's unfortunate.
but I mean, as for who the alternative to them would be, I mean, it's difficult to say. I mean, we've just had elections here last month, and the Conservatives have now become the opposition, so potentially it could be them. But saying that, that's not really that Scotland is becoming more conservative again. It's just that nobody's really quite yet forgiven the Labour Party. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's difficult to say, but I would say at this point in time, maybe the Conservatives, yeah.
I mean, what is, when you talk to other Scottish people, what is the feeling towards England in general? I mean, are most people just sort of neutral about it?
Yeah, I would say most people are neutral. I mean, I certainly don't detect much anti-Englishness anymore. I mean, I used to. I mean, in the 90s, like you said, I remember a lot of it back then, but just not now. I mean, most of my friends are actually SNP, and when I get talking about politics with them, it doesn't even get mentioned. So,
Yeah, yeah. No, I think it's a good thing. I mean,
yeah,
I remember being in Edinburgh and some guy throwing an Englishman out of a shop, well, throwing him out, asking him to leave. Yeah, it's nice that that kind of thing is more or less done.
yeah. Well,
But
I would hope so. Yeah.
the idea, it's such a strange idea of some hypothetical future where you know United Kingdom is effectively reduced down to maybe England and Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland. I guess Northern Ireland is much more iffy, but Scotland is sort of on its own within the European Union. That would just be weird, I think. I can't imagine that happening, actually.
Well, neither can I. And the important thing to remember is that for Scotland to have another referendum on independence, that would have to be agreed to by the central government in the UK, Westminster. So if they say no, then it's just not going to happen at all.
Yeah, and it's not really in their interest to acquiesce to that, to be perfectly honest. I mean,
No,
yeah,
no,
we'll let you have another referendum, and this time you can vote out now. I mean, wouldn't make any sense.
no, not at all. I mean, even Gibraltar is in talks with Scotland right now
Hmm.
to come under Scottish governance in case we do leave the UK, then rejoin the EU. So
Ah,
things
interesting.
like that, I think, Westminster would be well to just put this down right now. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, there doesn't. It just doesn't seem like there are legitimate economic or political reasons for Scotland, at least, to stay to separate from England and then to stay in the EU. It just seems to be sort of, to me, it just seems like they're just doing it to go against the English trend, perhaps. But like maybe I'm just imagining that.
I don't know, you could be right, but I get the sense it is more political. It's left wing versus right wing.
Hmm.
And I think,
Well, yeah, sorry for interrupting, but you mentioned immigration, but immigration has hardly struck Scotland, at least not in the degree that it has in England.
no, no.
Um, having listened to a few Scottish people talk about this, they posited the idea that had Scotland been equally affected by the immigration waves, just as England has been, they almost certainly would have voted out. But Scotland, is sparsely populated, relatively speaking. There aren't a lot of immigrants going there, maybe because they don't like the weather. Who knows? But yeah, so it doesn't really seem. It just seems to be a question of circumstance. Maybe for whatever reason, the next 5 years, Scotland gets tons of immigrants, and they'll change their tune.
Yeah, I mean, can I say that is exactly my view? And I've said that in the comments in your previous videos on Brexit. Scotland just hasn't been subject to the same experience that England has when it comes to immigration. But I think, though, that if we did leave the UK, then rejoin the EU, we would obviously be subject to EU immigration policy, in which case I think Scotland would learn the hard way. In 30 years from now, we'd be crying out for our own referendum to leave the EU. So, yeah.
I mean, hmm. I mean, your positions here strike me mostly to be positions of pragmatism. You don't strike me as a, some sort of super nationalist or anything like that.
No, no, I mean, as I've told you before, I don't do nationalism or patriotism or any of that kind of stuff. This
Just
is just a place I'm
practically
from, really.
speaking, for you personally, and I guess you think for the country, more beneficial for the United Kingdom to remain outside of the EU and for Scotland to remain part of the Union.
Yeah. Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah. I mean, if Scotland did leave the United Kingdom, then rejoin the EU, then you know what, I could be wrong. I mean, it could turn out quite well and the country would be quite happy, but I really don't think that's a risk worth taking because immigration, I think, was one of the biggest factors for the Leave vote winning. And
Yeah.
I would hate to have to see Scotland sort of go through the same experience as England, only to, 30 years down the line, cry out for its own referendum, like I just said, because at the moment I really can't see that happening.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't. I mean, there are some questions that have been raised, though, with regards to Brexit. I mean, not only Nigel Farage's own sort of skepticism towards the people that originally supported the idea, but I mean, it's going to take at least 2 years to actually get underway. A lot could happen. Maybe they would call for a second referendum, maybe not. Uh, I mean, this just seems more like a dream at this point in time than anything else. I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't feel like it has real substance to it. And I'm saying this as a complete outsider, being neither Scottish nor English. Um,
Well, that's exactly how I feel right now. So,
mm. You mentioned that the continent, the EU for the continent's a bit like atonement. Yeah, I mean, part of it was for uh, yeah, Germany and France to get along better. But I've said this before in my videos. I just don't think this whole United Europe thing works particularly well. Even the United States, and I know you have a lot of relatives there, so you're familiar. This
yeah.
idea that the United States is a singular unit, states can be very, very different from each other in terms of the economics, taxes. Some states have a sales tax on clothing, others don't. Policies. Uh, Somehow, due to the history, over 200 years now, um, it sort of works, sort of. But the European continent in particular doesn't have that history of just sort of being part of the same club and sort of getting along. It seems largely artificial. And I said in the video, the United Kingdom really has always kind of been a man's, kind of like a man standing outside of Europe, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, technically you're part of Europe. I mean, geographically speaking, you fought wars in Europe. You had political and economic relations, but you kind of stand outside of it, and I totally understand that because part of me, the part that's not European, feels a sort of a bit of a disconnect sometimes with sort of, I guess, purely Europeans in terms of their nationality or whatever. But I I don't know. I just wish, as I had a talk with Tealier about this, that it didn't have to just come to this where the only way to sort of preserve some sense of national identity. And it's not, I like you, I don't really value that particularly much, but people just feel like they just have to burn everything down to the ground and then just sort of start all over. So it's, UK gets out of the EU, maybe countries in the continent will follow, and that's just it. I don't think it's going to make for particularly peaceful relations. There's even talk of some of these clowns in Brussels about taking a kind of retributive action, such as penalizing the UK. Um, but ultimately, I agree with you. I think it's important that United Kingdom get out. Better now than later.
Yeah, yeah.
Don't let it linger too long. It's going to be painful now. It'll take a long time. The Whatever happens next, the actual political stuff, this needs to be put into action ASAP, because what you don't want to end up, you guys, in a situation where people are still talking about Brexit 6 or 7 years from now and nothing's come of it.
Yeah. I mean, maybe I'm just a bit too suspicious, but I do get the feeling that's kind of why they are dragging it out yet. They haven't invoked Article 50 for leaving,
Oh, they
which
will
is,
do, almost certainly. I mean, Cameron, to be fair, in his defense, and I think he made a pretty decent speech towards the end. He was pretty graceful. He supported stay in, so it kind of makes sense that he wouldn't be the one to usher in Article 50. But whoever replaces him will almost certainly have to do that to stay true to the wishes of the majority vote.
yeah, I mean, I would think they would. But saying that, though, the MP Jeremy Hunt, that's the health secretary that's been in the fight with the junior doctors over the NHS contracts.
Yeah.
He's kind of said that a second referendum might be on the cards. So that's kind of what makes me a little bit suspicious. If they're going to wait for the 2 months till Cameron leaves, then his successor might just turn around and say, right, well, the referendum was too close to call, really, so we'll hold another one.
Hmm.
But like I said, I'm maybe just a bit too suspicious. So
I think your suspicion is justified. As I noted before, Farage at least had noticed people like Daniel Hannan and Boris Johnson seemingly soften on their perspectives on some of this stuff. I mean, really, the only one who's been really sort of hardcore and through has been Farage on this. He really hasn't relented at all,
yeah, yeah,
um, for better or worse. We don't. Here's one thing: nobody knows what the ultimate outcome is going to be. If the UK leaves, um, it could be better off, but it also could be worse. We don't really know. And got to respect the man at least for following through with that perspective that it's going to be better for the UK to leave. Um, the other aspect to this, I think, after you mentioned immigration quite a bit, I think the damage that immigration has done is is going to remain. Even if you have a speedy exit, 2 years you're out. I'm not really sure what you're going to do with, potentially, I guess if you count all these different nationalities, maybe even a few million immigrants who were in the UK. I mean, I guess you could round them up at gunpoint and send them away, but I'm just not sure how you would execute that.
yeah. I mean, I've said the exact same thing myself. I mean, the damage is done now, so really it's about damage control.
Yeah.
And the only way they really could fix it would be to round up hundreds of thousands of people and deport them, which they're not going to do. I mean, that would be tied up in the court system for years, and accusations of
Yeah.
racism and
Well,
intolerance.
yeah. I mean, never
So,
mind that as exactly. I mean, the bureaucratic nightmare that would be. It strikes me as similar to the idea of, I guess you follow American politics. Trump, who's going to get rid of all the immigrants. Well, good luck with that.
yeah,
Even if the political and the popular will were completely behind that, the amount of manpower that would require, and then the courts, it's just not going to happen. So yeah, I guess it is just coming down to damage control to sort of keep the new ones out, pretty much.
yeah,
Um, but I mean, here's the thing. I mean, I know you're a bit of a libertarian, and there's a bit of a libertarianism in me as well. A lot of this stuff with regards to labor, say blue collar jobs, manual labor, there's a lot of resentment towards Eastern Europeans and Polish people. It's a kind of economic protectionism, isn't it? I mean, well, the Polish people are taking our jobs and doing it for cheaper and better, so we can't have that. We're going to get rid of them. I mean, that is protectionist at the end of the day.
yeah. Well, I mean, that's kind of the point of having an Australian style point system,
Hmm.
is because at the moment it's just hundreds of thousands of unskilled workers coming into this country. So what you need to remember is, though, that between 2014 and 2015, I think it was, there was something like 750,000 jobs available across the whole of the UK. That's England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales put together. And at the same time, there was something like 2 million people unemployed. So when you've got that with hundreds of thousands of immigrants coming into the country unchecked, it's just going to exacerbate the problem.
Mm, yeah. And of course, I mean, I know you follow this other issue. Um, I've said this before. Even if there were a completely clean break from the EU, some of the worst issues with Islam in the UK are from, well, Muslims within the UK. Uh, that issue doesn't seem to will not be reconciled. I suppose the way the United Kingdom government deals with it might be slightly different. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I think that's really just due to numbers again, just such high numbers. And typically, when a lot of Muslim immigrants come, they just don't integrate with the local white population at all. They just stick to their own little communities, still speak their own languages, whether it's Arabic, Urdu, or
Yeah.
whatever. So, and you can see why. I mean, if there's enough people like you around about, you're not exactly going to integrate with the native culture.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
And it's not that it's just them, though. I think that's just human nature, really.
oh
There's a
yeah,
lot of,
but that's the point, right? I mean, that is human nature.
yeah.
When I first started living abroad, when I was a young man in my 20s, basically, I initially just gravitated to other English speakers, Americans. It took me a while to get over that, but it's almost like instinct. And from my understanding, although it's been a while since I've been in the UK, some of the bigger cities, they're just basically little towns within cities of like Pakistan, basically little Pakistan um, or well, Birmingham is a huge Muslim population as well. So yeah, that it seems to me will be something for the UK government to deal with. I think the only really effective thing, the only effective measure that the leaving exit Brexit, the European Union will do will be to get rid of the EU nationals, really, because I guess those are the ones that are mostly competing for the low skill jobs.
Yeah, yeah, I would say that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, as you pointed out, there are disadvantages. I mean, if you're a young, and this is why I suppose a lot of the youth voted to stay. A young person that wanted to work or study abroad, you've just had your plans potentially cut short. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's another reason I'm saying that I'm not exactly happy about it because I'm all too aware that a lot of people are, not going to benefit from this, at least in the short term. But, then again, it's just one of those things. I mean, they'll just have to change their plans and come up with something else.
Yeah,
Go
yeah.
to a British university. So,
Yeah, that's the nature of life,
yeah, life is full
Something
of disappointments. So,
yeah, you got to deal with it and move on. Yeah, I was just mentioning how I have to think about where I'm going to move to next because I'm going to have to leave in about a year or so.
yeah.
And I didn't expect that to happen, but it did, and you just got to deal with the cards that are dealt to you. But it does seem to be primarily, kind of the interest in leaving is mostly sort of blue collar, I think, rather than the middle class, primarily very sort of liberal, even SJW esque types who largely aren't even hit by this. I mean, when I was looking at my Facebook feed a couple of days ago after the thing hit the news, it was just. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I went to university with a bunch of fucking stuck up, yuppie people living in the clouds. I mean, I always felt a bit odd because I tended to be more pragmatic. And anyway, the posts and the feeds, all the same thing. They're so stupid. And, this woman voted and she didn't even know what it entailed. And I think it's interesting that British society has always been about sort of classism, hasn't it? And Brexit very much, rather than, I mean, I guess there was some racial element as well, but more than anything else, it sort of broke down along class lines and age as well. Like I said, sort of the yuppie, overeducated people who happen to have the fortune and the money to live in fancy areas of London want, of course, stay, but they don't know how the guy in, I don't know, Cardiff is sort of toughing it out trying to find work. So I always find that fascinating about British culture, that it just ultimately comes down to sort of class and classism on some level.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the Leave vote won for a variety of different reasons. I mean, I wouldn't say it's because Britain is becoming more libertarian. It's not. It's not that everybody's just supporting Nigel Farage now. There's just many different reasons, and class is going to be one, immigration is going to be one,
Yeah.
and yeah, so to try and pin it on one specific thing, I don't think you can. So,
Yeah, that would be that would be pretty difficult. I mean, if there is a Scottish referendum, and when would that happen? Theoretically, I guess next year, right?
yeah, well, the SNP want that to happen before the UK officially leaves the European Union, so that would have to be in the next 2 years.
Yeah, but it strikes me as bluster. There's just
Yeah, but like I said, I mean, it probably won't happen because the UK government just won't allow it. I mean, the Scottish government can't just say, right, we're going to hold a referendum, then do it. It's got to be authorised by Westminster, and they are just
yeah.
not going to
Well,
do that.
this is one of the great complaints, that no matter what Scotland might decide on its own, it still needs to come down to Westminster and what they decide.
Yeah, yeah.
But I guess depending on your perspective, that can be good or bad. I mean, if you're,
Yeah, if you're
super,
like me and you're going to vote no, then it's a good thing. So,
yeah, yeah. I mean, it'd be interesting to see what the basis of the Scottish vote to remain actually was. Nationalism, resentment towards the English, or just something else entirely, like we discussed, along the lines of you just haven't experienced massive immigration.
the Scottish vote main,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what the motive, what their reasoning and arguments were. I admit I haven't studied all of the arguments they've offered to stay, but Scotland was one of the few places in the United Kingdom, majoritarily, that voted to remain.
well, I think it's mostly political. I mean, there's maybe going to be a few people, like you say, who just want to stick it to the English, but for the most part, it seems to be more about politics than anything else, just by the sheer fact that Scotland is more left leaning than England. Whereas in England, politics is a bit more varied. You've got, I would say, a healthier mix of political views down there. Whereas here, it's just almost entirely dominated by the left.
I wasn't aware it was that bad. I mean, bad, that dominated by the left, as it were.
Yeah, well, traditionally, before people voted SNP, they would have voted Labour. But saying that, though, I mean, I will say I'm going to contradict myself here, but in the early 90s, the Conservatives did have a majority of seats in Scotland. So, I just don't know. It maybe used to be a healthier balance here as well, but certainly in my adult lifetime, it's kind of gone more and more towards the left.
Hmm. So, do you feel as sort of an odd man out, being libertarian esque, or
Oh God, yeah, yeah. I mean, all my friends are pretty much SNP or somewhere on the left, and I mean, they know my political views, but I don't really think they understand politics a great deal because they kind of joke about me being a fascist sometimes. So, uh,
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 that's interesting. I wasn't aware of that. Huh.
yeah, well, they know I'm on the right, which is technically what a libertarian is. So they kind of make jokes now and again about me being a fascist. So,
Yeah.
but I mean, it's all in good humor.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, above all, you strike me as sort of a pragmatist. I don't really see, you don't really have terribly polarized views on any of this, it seems.
No, I mean, as it comes to the Brexit right now, I'm feeling strangely detached from it. Like I said, it's just
Yeah.
because I'm not sure it's going to happen yet. And I'm also kind of having these feelings that ultimately I'm not really in control of it all anyway. And as TLDR said to you, that comment about sitting back with a martini and having a good chuckle
Yeah.
while everything just kind of burns around you. I'm just think I'm moving more towards that end of it now. So,
Yeah. Well, immediately when it took place, I was thinking about the implications of, the dissolution of the EU and all this other kind of stuff. And I was thinking, well, a week later, I'm thinking, yeah, slow down.
Yeah.
The sky isn't falling yet. I'm not going to be booted out of Germany because I'm not a German citizen yet, and all these other things. It's going to take time, I think, and we all know how efficient European bureaucracies are. But problem I see is that in general, the longer the European Union is dragged out, the worse the potential consequences might be. I mean, we might actually see a legitimate rise of, I've said this many times, of prototypical fascism because
Yeah, yeah.
people are just they don't want to address the issue now. Don't cut out the tumor now. Just let the tumor fester, and then it's just too late. That's my feeling on that. I just think that the EU's time as a concept has come and gone. Even though I benefit from the labor mobility, but it seems to make a lot of people sort of unhappy and ill at ease. And the immigration issue, of course, is the hugest one. I can't comment too much on the United Kingdom, but certainly in continental Europe, the demographics have changed vastly in the last decade or two. Um, just it's almost alien, and some people like that, and other people don't. So
Yeah, I mean, I just think the EU just got too big and too ambitious, and if it had been
yeah,
kept to that sort of bare bones trade agreement with other little, agreements made between the countries themselves, it could have worked out fine. But
yeah. I mean, essentially, it overreached, and the overreaching was mostly in the political realm rather than sticking to the economics, deciding policies for other countries without, as good as it is or as bad as it is, representation is a bad thing. Already smelt it back in the day when they were pushing the Lisbon Treaty, despite several countries rejecting it and just no, 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 it doesn't matter. And yeah, I think this could end poorly. Some countries more so than others. I mean, it would take a lot for Germany to just sort of leave, but Dutch politicians have called for referendums, French politicians. So I guess it's just wait and see. At the moment, it's just a bit surreal, and I just don't really. I have no control over it, so it's gonna sort of sit back and wait. Um,
yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily think that Britain alone leaving the European Union is going to cause the whole thing to collapse. I mean, I think that would only happen if maybe France and Germany did leave themselves, or if
yeah,
one or
Germany
two others
won't.
would.
I don't think France could do because Le Pen is geared up to run for president, and she's really been big on pushing to leave. And yeah, it definitely I think is a matter. If France does, a matter of time till other countries decide because France essentially being an EU leader, definitely the symbolic value would be pretty powerful, and then maybe even Germany would follow suit. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think what is most likely going to happen is it's going to be the rich Western, Northern European countries that will leave. Then that will just keep the poorer Eastern Bloc countries and Mediterranean ones in the Union, in which case it just won't really be anything anymore, I don't think.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you don't have the European Union without northern, sort of the more northern European countries.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, the rest of it's just artificial. They don't have the economic structures to support it or to remain really. If anyone, look, at the end of the day, there are still individual countries. If the European Union falls apart, it's not going to be Germany, the Netherlands, or Scandinavia that's going to suffer the most. It'll be places like Spain and Greece and Italy, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
and that won't be pleasant. Those are the countries I think more than any place else that are going to be candidates for potential fascism or pseudo fascism or what have you.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah.
You know. Well, I think we covered all the bases. Anything else you'd like to add moving forward as a Scottish person in particular?
Well, as for the Brexit, I would just say that. I wouldn't bank on Scotland voting for independence because, for the simple fact that Westminster is just not going to allow a second referendum. But if it somehow did happen, I would just be really concerned that this country is just going to get fucked over the way that Greece, Spain, and even Ireland was as well, if we're
Yeah.
going to be subject to the single European currency. So,
Well, yeah. I mean, whatever countries didn't buy into the single currency, they're in a good position. So thankfully, in your case, that was, and as well as many Eastern European countries.
yeah, I think we dodged a bullet there, really.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, though that said, with the fact that economies are tied into each other, it would be pretty difficult I mean, if the EU did crash or there's some horrible incident, it's not like it wouldn't affect the United Kingdom. It would just be sort of less affected.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, it's just something we're going to have to wait and see about. I mean, the dust is still settling at the moment, so
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, it's been a week. Nothing's happened. Um, I'm sure politicians will continue to do what they're going to do and just talk, 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 and talk more. So,
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's what I think. It's just a matter of time, really. So,
you know. Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. An authentic Scotsman who has his own authentic views on Brexit. I thank him for joining me. Will be more perspectives to come. Pretty soon, I'll actually be covering Estonia, which is a very interesting country, in particular because the way it restructured its society and government and economy after the Soviet bloc fell apart. So that'll be up, or once it's done, it'll be up pretty soon. Everyone else, thanks for tuning in, and thanks for joining us. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.